Hi guys, and welcome to another review video. This week I'll be having a close look at the Sakura Koi Coloring Brush pens by popular demand on my haul video where you guys got to have a quick look at them. As per usual, I'll be taking a very thorough look at these pens, and timestamps to key sections of the video will be down below in the video description. To start with, I'll be taking a look at the packaging and pens themselves. Next, I'll be swatching them to understand their application and characteristics. And finally, I'll be showing you a time-lapse completed using the pens, showing you what techniques can be achieved, as well as some added background and my own personal opinions of the product. I'm not sponsored by Sakura or anybody mentioned in the video, so I can promise you that my thoughts are my own. I just like making these videos and sharing information with you guys. So to start off with, let's take a look at the packaging. Right off the bat, these pens are very conveniently packaged in a rigid plastic pouch. This is a great material, I think. It's lightweight but keeps the pens together and protected. I've got the 12 set here as I just wanted a small set of colours to play around with, but these sets also come in 24 and 48 sets of colour, and there are also 6 sets available in bright colours, greys, pastels and skin tones. Pens are also available open stock, and they offer colourless blending pens designed for this set separately. So the space on the packaging is pretty limited, although they've certainly made use of the available space. Branding information is clearly visible on the front, that these are made by the company Sakura, and the product line is Koi, and that these are the flexible brush markers. You might be able to tell that the packaging is not in pristine condition anymore, and that's because I've been using these and carrying them around with me. And I've also been using the surface of the casing as a makeshift palette for mixing colours on the go as well, when using this product together with a water brush. At the bottom here it says blendable, odourless, transparent colour and water-based ink, and the other side says thin and bold lines with one flexible brush tip. We'll see how true these statements are later on in the video, but I'm impressed with just how many descriptors they've crammed onto the front here, and managed to do it in 3 languages too. Turning over to the back now with even more information. There's a little colour chart here at the side, which is a nice touch, as although the packaging is translucent and you can see the colour of the caps through the packaging, you otherwise wouldn't be able to know the names of the colours included in this set. At the top it has the blurb in English, which I'll read through quickly and refer back to later in the video. Achieve fine, medium or bold brush strokes by changing the pressure to the nib. The durable tip quickly springs back to the original shape, stroke after stroke. The dye-based inks blend easily to create a multitude of colour hues. Compact pen length of 140mm is convenient for on-the-go artists. The special blender pen creates seamless washes and colour gradations. This product is made in Japan by Sakura, and as such I've heard that these are a good price in Australia, New Zealand and Asia compared to similar professional grade brush pens that are manufactured in Europe or the US. Okay, so now looking at an individual pen. These pens are indeed compact compared to most markers. They're the same size as the Faber-Castell Pitt pens and the Sakura Pigment liner pens, perhaps a touch thinner. They are shorter than the Sakura Jelly Roll and Caran Fibralo pens. I think that they are a great size and comfortable to hold, and even though I have relatively large hands, I don't find them too small or clumsy to use. Each pen has a black body with a coloured lid and end, with white print on the barrel showing manufacturer name, brand name, etc. Also included is a little stamp showing that these are up to the ASTMD standards, which is always to be expected with a good quality art supply. And it also says that these are water-based dye stuff inks. Also printed on the pens is who the pens are marketed for, and it says students, graphic artists, designers, illustrators, architects and cartoonists. And in tiny print, somewhat hidden next to the barcode, is the colour name and number. I think it would have been nice to have the colour name a little clearer and perhaps have some of the unnecessary information removed. The print on the pens seems to be pretty resilient, as although I've used them a fair bit, nothing has worn away or chipped off. Looking at the build quality of the pens, they're made out of a tough plastic. The moulding on the lid could be slightly better, but the sprue and mould lines weren't particularly noticeable until I put them under my close scrutiny here. What I did notice straight away though was how these lids don't click into place and need to be quite firmly slid on to ensure proper closure. This is certainly more apparent when you put them back into their plastic wallet, as the top of the plastic wallet won't close if the pen lids poke out further than they're meant to. And if it wasn't for this fact, I wouldn't have noticed that I wasn't closing the pens properly, but I'm not sure if this has any implications for the pens, say if this would make them dry out or not. Moreover, the packet only fits all 12 pens if the clips are facing the front, but you can prevent the pens from spinning in the pack by putting the clip over the front edge of the packaging like so, and the package still closes perfectly. Now taking a close look at the brush nibs, they are very broad at the base and taper to a fine point. The nibs are made out of nylon, which is a very resilient material and is also spongy and flexible. The tips of my pens that I'm showing here are frayed very slightly from use, so I imagine over time and usage they wouldn't hold as crisp and fine point as they do at the start of their life. This is also worth mentioning in regards to refilling these pens. They aren't technically refillable, so no refill inks or spare nibs are sold for the pens, but you probably could refill them with a watercolour ink such as P.H. Martin's inks. However, I imagine that the nib would have deteriorated by the time the ink has run out in the pens. Speaking of refilling though, I tried pulling on the end of the nib to see if I could get it out without more drastic action, but it didn't seem to budge, so if you were to refill these you'd probably have to apply it dropwise onto the nib to refill the reservoir inside. And in slightly related news, I tried the same with the Caran Fibralo pens and the nibs can be pulled out fairly easily. But now onto the swatching. As always, I can't promise if the colours you see on screen will be truly representative of the ink colour, but I'll also include a high-resolution scan of the swatch sheet in the description box down below, which should be a little more accurate in terms of colour. I'll swatch these pens to see what they look like unadulterated straight from the pen. I've got a dark line drawn down here in waterproof ink as well, so you can judge the transparency of the pens too. I'll allow these swatches to fully dry and then I'll layer the same colour over the top to see how saturated you can get these pens. And I'll also fill in a little square in the next column over, which I'll be using to see how well the pens activate once dried. I'm just using some cheap watercolour paper for this test, as I usually do. I'd get better results on a higher quality paper, but I'm sure you can't blame me for wanting to keep my expensive paper for artwork rather than tests and scribbles. These pens are beautifully bright and saturated. The colour range of this 12 set seems to be pretty good. I like how they included a pale skin-like colour. They didn't include a grey though, but I find this to be a reasonable choice given that the black produces a brilliant range when activated with water. Perhaps an improvement though would be if the red was brighter and if the purple and dark blue were a little more different in value. Like most products, the colour of the pen cap doesn't match the ink colour and should only be used as a rough guide, so as always I recommend making and keeping a swatch chart handy. Next, I'll fill in the last column and activate the colour straight away with a water brush to see how readily the pigments dissolve when wet. They do so excellently and I can create some beautiful inky textures too. Back onto the first column now to add the second layer, as the first one has had long enough to sufficiently dry. It doesn't take too long it seems, but it will depend on the absorbency of your paper you're using. The layering is quite difficult to see with the yellow, but it seems to work very well with the rest of the colours. Now onto the middle column again, where I use a damp brush to apply water to the paper and gently pull pigments from the coloured square. This works pretty well, and some colours seem to activate a little more readily than others, but overall they did a great job. I managed to get some splotchy textures in there by accident when I added a touch more water than necessary. So being patient and knowing when to stop is important if you want smooth and seamless transitions. Back onto the first column again for more layering. I did this another 2 times, leaving sufficient time in between to allow for drying. For most of the colours I managed to get 4 different shades just by layering, and I imagine for some a 5th layer would also be visibly different in saturation, but I ran out of space and the paper was beginning to deteriorate. So I'm sure with better paper you could really push these colours. Now for a closer look at the qualities and characteristics of these pens. First off, I wanted to see how these pens blended into each other without the aid of water. So I used the yellow, red and blue pen for this, and with a flicking motion of the pen I was able to get a surprisingly good blend. It isn't perfectly seamless of course, but the pens are able to blend together very nicely. They're very juicy, so you're able to push the ink around a little on the paper surface. I was careful to clean the nib of the pens, the yellow in particular, between strokes to avoid contamination. Next was to see how these blended with water, so I applied the same pen colours again to the paper, without any overlap this time, and used my water brush to pull and mix pigments together. This also worked really well, and by being careful I was able to get a relatively smooth gradient. The colours are still more saturated where the pens were applied directly to the paper though. Next up I drew some purple squares for a later test, and then I tried out to see how much line variation I could get with this pen. I found it a little difficult to get consistently thin lines owing to the flexibility of the tip, but the variation is great and you can use either pressure or angle to change line weight. As such, I imagine these would be great for brush pen calligraphy, and I can agree with what was said on the packaging about the nib springing back to its original form and creating a multitude of lines. At the bottom I set some more squares for testing. I wanted to see how well the dyes lifted off of the paper. First off, I tried lifting as soon as the ink was applied, using a wet brush and some tissue paper to remove the pigments, and this worked very well, with the paper almost returning to white. Back on up to the purple squares. I wanted to see how readily these pigments dissolved once dry, and I did this already in the chart of course, but I wanted a more controlled test. The first square was activated by one single stroke of the brush, and the second one I scrubbed at the pigment and used a brush to pull the pigments across the paper. The pigments do make a light wash with just a light touch of the brush, but still a strong boundary remains where the ink was deposited from the pen onto the paper. On the other hand, the boundary seemed to completely disappear with the second block. So back to the final green block, which is thoroughly dried now, for the lifting test. So I used a similar amount of pressure and water as the first one, and I was able to lighten up the colour quite considerably, although it does now appear that the paper is stained green. Well, I think I've tested enough now, so now onto the Speedpaint. So instead of cheap watercolour paper, I'm using Canson Moulin du Roi 300 grams or 140 pounds hot pressed watercolour paper, which is the same paper I've used in my other brush pen reviews. I really recommend something that's very smooth for brush pens. It results in less abrasion on the nibs, and the paper seems to stay smoother and pill less too. Watercolour paper, or at the very least mixed media paper, is also a must if you plan on activating these pens with water. I sketched the birds out using a purple Prismacolor Col-Erase pencil, but I made sure to keep my lines light to avoid indenting the paper, and so they wouldn't be visible when I added the pens on top. Starting out, I mainly blended the colours together just using the pens themselves by blocking out an area and then adding spots of the nuanced colour on top. And then I used the base colour again to blend them out. I found that the pale orange colour was great for blending out because it is the least saturated out of all of the colours. I can certainly attest to the packaging that these pens are blendable, odourless and transparent. Similarly, the packaging also said that the dye-based inks blend easily to create lots of hues, and I can agree as well. I found even with this small 12 set I had enough to create this drawing, and I didn't feel like I was missing anything that I couldn't create by blending pens together or diluting them with water. I can't make any comment about the blending pens that Sakura sell to accompany these sets, but I think that the waterbrush did a good job. However, as mentioned, these pens are dye-based as opposed to pigment-based, so therefore they are not light-fast. This also explains why the packaging and pens themselves seem to market them as a professional design tool rather than a professional art material. Although the difference in the wording is subtle, it's implied that professional art supplies should be reasonably light-fast, whereas design tools are not held up to the same light-fast standards. Design tools are perfectly suited for fast laydown of vibrant colour, so alcohol-based markers such as Copics or Pro markers are other examples of design tools, and they aren't light-fast either. Pieces created with such supplies are best suited to being scanned and made prints of, rather than hung and displayed where they're likely to fade. Online it says that these pens can be used for a variety of drawing applications such as journaling, illustration, manga, comic art, sketching and architectural drawings, but the one that surprised me the most was these pens can be used for rubber stamping too. But I'm surprised they didn't include fashion design and calligraphy in this list, as I'm sure that these pens would be very well suited to that too. These pens worked beautifully on this paper, much better than the cheap watercolour paper that I used in the swatch test. I felt that the inks could be blended and moved on the paper surface a little easier and that they didn't soak into the paper as fast. The paper seemed to make the colours brighter too, and holds up very well to the abrasion from the nibs of the pens. I checked out Sakura's website after completing the piece, and it turns out that the paper I used is the perfect match for these pens, being heavyweight plate finish paper, smooth but not coated, and I'll leave a link to that page in the description box down below. Like in the swatch tests, I used a Caran water brush to dissolve the pens. I really enjoy using water brushes for water-based pens, as I find that it offers great control of how much water is applied to the page, and the brush remains consistently damp. A water brush and a sketchbook that handles wet media is perfect to accompany this set, and I can particularly recommend the Canson Mixed Media Artbook or Moleskine's Watercolour Journal for art when out and about or for quick studies. These pens are definitely well suited for speedy colour application. This piece took me an hour to colour, or an hour and a quarter including sketching time. Although it is possible to get a variety of line weights with the pen nibs, I decided that I wouldn't be able to get fine enough lines for the finest details, so I used some fine liners for this painting too. I think the crispness of the lines pairs very well with the texture from the Koi pens, and is very reminiscent of pen and wash illustrations. I bought these pens from Jackson's Art Supplies for £15, that's excluding the discount that I got on them though, but they're also available on the UK Amazon for £15 at the time of the video, or $14 on the US Amazon site. It looks to be that when purchasing these pens in sets, they're just over £1 or $1 per pen. Given their quality, especially their vibrancy and ability to blend, I think that's a very good price for them. So I can't really find anything serious to fault these pens on as far as my experiences with them. Perhaps a couple of the colour choices in the 12 set could be slightly different to optimise variety and mixing, as I mentioned earlier, but that really is down to personal preference. And perhaps the colour name could be slightly clearer on the pen body, but once again that is a minor complaint. Overall, I'm really pleased with the outcome of this drawing. I love the balance between realism and illustration. I do plan on doing some more in-depth tutorials about water-based marker techniques and blending in the future, so let me know if you'd be interested in something like that. So here's the finished piece. I hope you found this video interesting and helpful. Please leave it a like if you did. I'd love to know what you think I should review next, and of course if you have any questions leave those in the comment section too, and I'll respond to you as fast as I can. Don't forget to subscribe if you want to stay up to date with my latest art videos, more reviews, tutorials, advice and challenges. Thank you very much for watching. I hope that you all have a lovely week and I'll see you in the next video.